The 70s may have rewritten the rules of cinema, but even the wide-open frontier of the Western genre had limits. As violence grew bloodier and heroes more broken, some filmmakers went too far. Governments panicked. Studios buried reels. Critics called them moral poison. What if the most honest Westerns were the ones no one was allowed to see? Number 15. The Hunting Party, 1971. At first glance, The Hunting Party looked like another star-powered Western adventure, boasting Gene Hackman and Oliver Reed. But behind its glossy poster was a film that critics called one of the most shockingly brutal Westerns ever made. Its premise followed a wealthy cattle baron who chases down the outlaw that kidnapped his wife across a desert that soon becomes a slaughterhouse. The story was simple, yet unrelenting. Hackman's character gathers a posse armed with long-range rifles to hunt the kidnappers for sport. But what unfolds is not heroism. It is a descent into sadism. Every bullet echoes cruelty. Every act of vengeance strips away civilization. When it premiered, censors in Britain and several European territories demanded cuts to its graphic scenes. Television networks refused to air it. Some theaters withdrew it after walkouts, and protest letters described the movie as a sickness pretending to be art. Behind the scenes, Reed clashed violently with Hackman, both men detesting the film's moral emptiness. Director Don Medford defended it as an allegory of Vietnam and America's thirst for domination. But the message drowned in blood. Over time, the film vanished from circulation, surviving only through battered VHS copies traded by collectors. Today, The Hunting Party is remembered as a Western that crossed every line of taste, and in doing so, exposed how fragile the myth of the noble cowboy had become. Number 14. Soldier Blue, 1970. Soldier Blue began as a romance but ended as a national trauma. Starring Candice Bergen and Peter Strauss, it told the story of a young woman and a soldier trying to survive after a cavalry massacre. What made it infamous was its final 30 minutes, a horrifying depiction of the Sand Creek Massacre, rendered in stomach-churning realism. The film's release came amid protests over the Vietnam War, and audiences immediately drew parallels between frontier atrocities and modern ones. Newspapers described it as the most violent film ever passed by the Motion Picture Association. In Britain and parts of Australia, it was refused classification entirely. Others demanded edits that removed the massacre sequence altogether. Studio executives at Columbia Pictures grew terrified of its reputation. They tried to market it as a peace statement, but critics saw only carnage. Religious groups called it blasphemy against American history. Government officials in Spain and South Africa banned it outright, citing moral corrosion. Director Ralph Nelson argued he wanted to show what American Westerns had always hidden: the genocide of native tribes behind patriotic myths. The result was a film too raw for its time. Nelson's career never recovered. Bergen distanced herself from the project, calling the experience psychologically scarring. Decades later, Soldier Blue resurfaced through film festivals and censorship debates. Historians now view it as a rare Western that dared to strip away illusion and force audiences to face the cost of conquest. Yet, even today, few dare to watch it twice. Number 13. The Wild Bunch, 1961. When Sam Peckinpah unleashed the Wild Bunch, it was like dynamite under the Hollywood system. The film followed aging outlaws on a final mission as the Old West gave way to modern brutality. But what shocked audiences was not the story, it was the way it was told. Slow-motion gunfights exploding with squibs, blood, and chaos that felt almost operatic. At its premiere, critics were divided between awe and disgust. Some hailed it as the death of the Western, others called it an atrocity. The Motion Picture Association nearly refused classification until Peckinpah cut seconds from its infamous opening massacre. In the United Kingdom, it faced heavy censorship, and in several countries, including Brazil and South Korea, it was banned for excessive violence. Behind the scenes, Peckinpah's crew struggled to realize his vision. The production endured near riots in Mexican towns where locals feared its explosions. Warner Brothers executives were horrified by early cuts, demanding a tamer edit for American theaters. Yet even the censored version caused walkouts and moral outrage. Over time, however, the movie's brutality came to be seen as poetry. It shattered the myth of the clean gunfight and revealed the emotional toll of killing. Today, The Wild Bunch stands as both masterpiece and warning, a film that redefined cinematic violence and forced the world to admit that the West was never clean. It was drenched in dust and blood. Number 12. A Fistful of Dynamite, 1971, also known as Duck You Sucker. This Sergio Leone epic was meant to close his legendary Dollars trilogy on a thunderous note. But instead, it ignited outrage and censorship fires across continents. Starring Rod Steiger as a cynical bandit and James Coburn as an Irish revolutionary, it fused Western mythology with the chaos of political rebellion during the Mexican Revolution. Audiences expecting another gunslinger fantasy found themselves trapped in a world of executions, bombings, and betrayals. Leone turned the Western into a critique of revolution itself, suggesting that every uprising devours its believers. When it premiered, Italian censors recoiled at its graphic violence and its portrayal of corrupt military leaders. The British Board of Film Classification refused to grant approval until several gruesome sequences were shortened. In the United States, its title was changed by nervous distributors, and much of its political dialogue was stripped away. Critics accused Leone of glorifying terrorism, while others accused him of mocking patriotism. The chaos extended behind the camera, too. Leone clashed with producers who wanted a marketable adventure, while he envisioned a tragic elegy for lost causes. For decades, the film circulated in butchered versions that erased its meaning. Only in restored editions did viewers finally grasp Leone's intent, a furious meditation on how ideals die under gunfire. Today, A Fistful of Dynamite remains a haunting monument to censorship's power to silence uncomfortable truths and to one director's refusal to romanticize history. Number 11. The Hired Hand, 1971. When Peter Fonda directed The Hired Hand, he wanted to bury the macho Western once and for all. The result was a slow, meditative tale about friendship, guilt, and redemption. Yet the studio and audiences were not ready for its unvarnished portrayal of death and moral decay. The film followed a drifter who returns home after years of violence only to find his wife estranged and his past haunting him. The camera lingered on corpses, sun glare, and silence. There were few shootouts, but when violence came, it was shocking in its realism. Universal Pictures. Executives panicked, calling it too grim, too European, too hopeless. The Motion Picture Association granted it an R rating, largely because of its unrelenting tone rather than any single scene. Television networks refused to air it, citing moral discomfort. Critics were divided, some praising it as a modern masterpiece, others condemning it as a betrayal of the genre. Behind the scenes, Fonda fought battles with editors who wanted to insert narration and upbeat music. He resisted insisting that the film should feel like the death of the American myth. Audiences walked out. The Hired Hand disappeared after a few weeks in theaters. Years later, it was rediscovered by cinephiles and historians who recognized it as one of the most honest westerns ever made. Its censorship was not official, but cultural, a rejection by a system that could not face its own fading soul. Number 10. The Ballad of Cable Hogue, 1970. After shocking the world with The Wild Bunch, director Sam Peckinpah turned to something quieter, or so everyone thought. The Ballad of Cable Hogue seemed gentle at first. A prospector left to die in the desert discovers water and builds a way station. But beneath the humor and tenderness lay a rage against greed and the cruelty of civilization. Though far less bloody than Peckinpah's previous work, it still ran into censorship troubles. Religious organizations protested its depiction of hypocrisy among preachers. Critics objected to the moral ambiguity of its hero, who profits off travelers while preaching generosity. In some European countries, local boards cut dialogue they deemed offensive to faith. Warner Brothers feared another scandal and limited its release. Television airings trimmed entire sequences, reducing it to a simple parable. Behind the scenes, Peckinpah fought depression and studio interference while trying to humanize a world he had earlier condemned. Over time, the film gained a cult reputation as Peckinpah's most personal statement, a story about survival in a dying West. But its censorship robbed it of momentum and ensured it never found the audience it deserved. The Ballad of Cable Hogue remains a bittersweet reminder that even a softer Western could still be punished for telling the truth about human weakness. Number 9. Lawman, 1971. Lawman arrived during the fading twilight of the traditional Western. Directed by Michael Winner and starring Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan, it promised audiences a tale of justice. Instead, it delivered something raw, brutal, and disturbingly honest. The story followed a rigid marshal who hunts down ranchers responsible for killing a man in his town. But his pursuit turns into a massacre that questions the very meaning of law. From its opening scene, the film shocked critics with its cold moral detachment. Lancaster's character was not a hero. He was a machine of vengeance who left corpses behind like footprints. Censors in Europe condemned its casual killings and bleak worldview. In several American cities, theaters refused to show it without parental warnings. The controversy deepened when reports surfaced that Winner had deliberately exaggerated gunshot wounds using new special effects to mimic torn flesh. Religious groups accused him of exploiting violence for art's sake. Behind the scenes, Lancaster reportedly clashed with the director over tone, claiming the film had turned nihilistic. Despite, or because of, the outrage, Lawman gained underground fame. Students debated its meaning in university film clubs, calling it the anti-Western that destroyed every myth about righteousness. Today, it stands as one of the most censored psychological Westerns of the decade and a mirror of the early 70s disillusionment, where justice looked no different from murder. Number 8. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, 1974. Sam Peckinpah's most notorious film did not begin as a Western, but it carried every ghost of the frontier. When it was released, critics called it filth masquerading as art. The premise followed a desperate man who sets out to claim a bounty on the head of a fugitive. What follows is a journey through corruption, greed, and madness across the dusty backroads of Mexico. The violence was relentless. Peckinpah turned gore into poetry, yet studios recoiled. Some countries banned it immediately, including South Africa and Norway. Even in the United States, entire scenes were cut to secure release. The Motion Picture Association debated whether to classify it as obscene. Behind the scenes, the production spiraled into chaos. Peckinpah battled alcoholism and producers who wanted to tone down the bloodshed. Crew members later said the film mirrored his own disintegration. Critics savaged it while audiences fled theaters in confusion. But as the years passed, it became a cult masterpiece admired for its honesty. Beneath the mayhem was a director exposing his own soul's decay. The censors may have tried to bury it, yet it became immortal precisely because it was unflinching. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia is not just a Western, it is a confession carved into celluloid. Number 7. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. Robert Aldrich's Ulzana's Raid was released at the height of the Vietnam War and instantly became one of the most controversial Westerns of its time. Burt Lancaster starred as a battle-hardened scout escorting soldiers through Apache territory. What began as a frontier mission became a savage portrait of cultural misunderstanding and endless brutality. The film's violence was methodical, clinical, and deeply unsettling. Aldrich refused to glamorize combat. Every raid, every retaliation was portrayed as equally monstrous. Reviewers compared its tone to a war documentary, and some nations banned it for undermining military heroism. In Britain, censors demanded heavy cuts, while television syndication in the United States was banned outright for over a decade. Behind the camera, Lancaster defended the film's brutality, calling it truth, not spectacle. Studio executives disagreed and slashed promotional budgets. Some theaters even screened an alternate version without the massacre scenes. Critics at the time dismissed it as an exploitation picture. Only decades later did historians reevaluate Ulzana's raid as one of the sharpest anti-war allegories of the 20th century. It dared to say that civilization itself was built on cycles of revenge. In censoring it, studios erased an essential warning about the violence lurking behind flags and uniforms. Number 6. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971. Robert Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller was never a typical Western. It was fog instead of sunlight, whispered words instead of gunfire. And yet it became one of the most censored films of its era, not for explicit gore, but for its overwhelming sense of moral decay. Starring Warren Beatty and Julie Christie, it told the story of two dreamers who build a brothel and gambling town in the snowbound wilderness only to be destroyed by corporate greed and violence. Audiences expecting a heroic frontier story instead found despair. Altman drenched the screen in rain and mud. The final shootout was quiet, slow, and horrifyingly real. In several countries, the movie faced censorship for its bleak portrayal of American ambition. Religious groups denounced it for glorifying vice, while network broadcasters refused to air it uncut due to its immoral tone. Behind the scenes, Altman fought constantly with Warner Brothers, who wanted more action and romance. Beatty himself financed retakes to preserve Altman's vision, but executives demanded edits. The battle led to multiple cuts circulating worldwide, some running 20 minutes shorter than the director intended. Critics were divided at first, but time revealed the genius beneath the grime. McCabe and Mrs. Miller became a defining anti-Western, a requiem for the myth of progress. Its censorship only made its meaning clearer. When business replaces humanity, even paradise freezes to death. Number 5. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, 1973. Sam Peckinpah returned again with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and once more paid the price for his honesty. The film should have been a simple tale of friendship and betrayal between an aging lawman and the outlaw he must kill. Instead, it became a war between a director and the studio system. The violence was poetic, yet haunting. Peckinpah portrayed killing as a ritual of sadness, not glory. MGM executives, however, panicked. They seized control of the film during editing, cutting entire scenes, and softening its ending. The director's cut, now legendary, was suppressed for over a decade. Internationally, censors demanded even more trims to scenes of execution and despair. When released in its mutilated form, critics mocked it as incoherent. Audiences stayed away. Peckinpah fell into depression and alcoholism that would end his career. But the legend grew. Bootleg copies of his original version circulated among filmmakers and students who recognized its brilliance. The song, "Knockin' on Heaven's Door," written for the film, became immortal, a hymn to lost souls wandering the frontier. Today, the restored version is considered one of the greatest elegies ever filmed. Its censorship did not erase its power. It only transformed it into a ghost story about what Hollywood fears most: truth without filters. Number 4. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Though released just outside the 70s, Heaven's Gate was born from the same decade's rebellion and paid the price for it. Michael Cimino's colossal vision turned the Johnson County War into an epic tragedy about class oppression and corruption in the American West. But what the public saw was chaos. 3.5 hours of blood smoke and heartbreak. Reports of on-set cruelty toward animals led to protests and bans in several countries. Censors objected to sequences of mass slaughter, both human and animal. The American Humane Association condemned the film, and several European boards refused certification. United Artists panicked, pulling it from theaters within weeks. Behind the scenes, Cimino's perfectionism pushed costs into disaster. The studio cut over an hour from the movie without his consent. Critics labeled it the death of the auteur era. Audiences mocked it as self-indulgent excess. Yet years later, the restored version revealed its tragic beauty. It was never about spectacle. It was a requiem for the American dream itself. Heaven's Gate became the ultimate censored Western, punished not only for its violence, but for daring to show that the frontier myth was built on slaughter and silence. Number 3. The Missouri Breaks, 1976. By the mid-'70s, Hollywood Westerns were fading fast, yet the Missouri Breaks tried to resurrect them in the strangest way possible. Starring Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson, it promised audiences a clash of acting titans and instead delivered one of the most subversive and controversial Westerns ever filmed. The story followed a gang of horse thieves hunted by a merciless regulator. But under Arthur Penn's direction, the film spiraled into psychological warfare. Brando played his character as a shape-shifting executioner, switching accents and disguises at will. His improvisations included scenes so disturbing that early preview audiences recoiled. The violence was intimate and slow, strangulations, executions, lingering close-ups of death. British and Canadian censors objected to its sadism, forcing several cuts before release. In the United States, the studio demanded edits to tone down Brando's more bizarre improvisations, fearing they bordered on madness. Behind the scenes, production was pure chaos. Brando refused to follow the script. Nicholson threatened to quit. Director Arthur Penn defended the film's grim humor as satire, but critics did not understand. Many reviewers dismissed it as insanity on horseback. The controversy crushed box office hopes. Yet time turned the Missouri Breaks into a strange masterpiece, a portrait of how the Western died by its own contradictions. Its censorship was an act of mercy and of fear, proof that even legends like Brando could push a genre past sanity. Number 2. The Outlaw, Josey Wales, 1976. Clint Eastwood's The Outlaw. Josey Wales began as a modest Western about revenge, but became one of the most politically charged films of the decade. It told the story of a Confederate farmer whose family is murdered, sending him on a journey of vengeance and reluctant redemption. What made it controversial was its sympathy for outlaws and its brutal realism. Censors in several countries viewed its violence as excessive, particularly its unflinching close-ups of gun wounds and corpses. The British Board of Film Classification initially refused to grant an uncut release, while TV networks edited nearly every gunfight. But the controversy ran deeper. Screenwriter Philip Kaufman was fired mid-production after clashes with Eastwood over the film's political tone. Rumors spread that government agencies had pressured distributors to soften its Confederate sympathies. Whether true or not, the whispers only fueled its legend. Behind the scenes, Eastwood fought studio executives who wanted a conventional hero. He refused. Instead, he made a film about trauma, loyalty, and survival. Less a Western, more a meditation on post-war America. Critics eventually hailed it as one of his greatest works, but at the time it was nearly buried under moral outrage. Today, The Outlaw Josey Wales is recognized as the turning point where the mythic cowboy became a broken man haunted by history. Censorship could not contain it. It only ensured that its anger would echo louder. Number 1. High Plains Drifter, 1973. Clint Eastwood again stood at the center of storm clouds with High Plains Drifter, a film so unsettling that even his own fans questioned his sanity. The story followed a mysterious stranger who rides into a corrupt town and delivers brutal vengeance on its citizens. But what disturbed censors most was its atmosphere of supernatural retribution. From its first frame, Eastwood's drifter feels like a ghost, a spirit of wrath returning to punish the guilty. The violence is relentless, methodical, and symbolic. When it premiered, many audiences walked out stunned. Critics accused it of nihilism. Religious groups denounced it for portraying divine vengeance as murder. In Britain and several American states, it faced heavy editing before being allowed into theaters. Behind the scenes, Eastwood faced internal studio panic. Universal Pictures feared its tone would destroy his image as a hero. Executives urged him to reshoot the ending to clarify that his character was not a ghost, but Eastwood refused. He wanted the story to remain a nightmare, a moral reckoning that offered no forgiveness. The controversy only deepened with time. Scholars now view High Plains Drifter as Eastwood's most daring film, a condemnation of cowardice and mob justice. Its censorship ensured that audiences missed the point, that the Old West was never about justice, only survival. And when the stranger rides back into the desert at the end, leaving the town burning behind him, it feels less like a Western and more like a sermon delivered by a ghost that Hollywood tried to silence. In the 70s, the Western was reborn as something darker, angrier, more honest, and the world wasn't ready. These censored tales showed a truth that comfort could not contain, that progress and morality were illusions built on dust and graves. Which of these forgotten outlaws deserves resurrection today? Like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more buried cinema legends.